My name is Dorothy Wang. I teach in the American Studies program here at Williams, and I teach both Asian American literature and contemporary poetry and whatever intersects between those two fields. I also teach contemporary experimental minority poetry, and I actually wanted to talk today about the challenges of teaching material that's very new, very foreign to students, and material that is difficult in a way that makes them resistant to reading it. And what seems like a problem or a difficulty can often turn into a really great opportunity for pedagogy. So in this particular case, I'm thinking of classes that I've taught in which, say, new minority American writing, which is very experimental, very contemporary writing by Asian American, Latino, Latina, Native American, and African American writers. And often the writing, first of all, looks nothing like poetry or fiction that students are used to, because often there are great formal innovations, so that syntax has been disrupted or sentences don't make sense in the ways that we're normally used to. This material is also very unusual in that it doesn't conform to what most students think about as minority writing or minority literature. So while they may expect, say, for Asian American short stories, something that's autobiographical or for a first person or about a family or generational differences, a lot of the writing that I teach has very few ethnic markers or anything that we expect normally to find in ethnic writing or in autobiographical writing or, say, in lyric poetry. So the usual response I get if students encounter this material, and almost every single person I would say almost 100% of the students have never seen these books or texts that I teach. The usual response is that they don't like it. They're not happy that they are being made to read something that isn't that easy to read, isn't that fun to read, isn't something that they can quote unquote relate to. And often that resistance, or because these texts defy their expectations of what literature are, their assumptions about what literature are, students often are annoyed, bored, angry. They're all irritated. There are many, many emotions that get evoked by the text that I teach. And so what happens is I go through a process of actually getting them to break down and identify what precisely annoys them or angers them. And I get them to question what the assumptions are that they have about what a literary text should do. So why do they assume, for example, that a literary text should produce pleasure? Or why do they assume that when they read something, they should be able to quote unquote relate to it? And what does that mean to relate to something? And I think what happens very gradually, but palpably over the course of a class or over the course of several classes, is they come to realize that what they thought was sort of just normal, objective ideas they had about literature are actually normative assumptions and conventions that they've been taught through many years of schooling, and what gets propagated, say, in traditional literature departments or English departments about what a poem is or what a story is or what ethnic writing is. And I think over the course, often I found this to be the case, that students begin to realize that they need to actually examine and call into question some of these assumptions, and that a book that is difficult or that doesn't yield easily to reading the first or second time can often have great value, and often can get them to think in ways that they wouldn't normally think. And I think they start to understand that the production of a literary text and the reception of a literary text actually involves a lot of institutional parameters, say in departments that decide what is a real literary text, the marketing of a book, how big New York publishers decide to publish certain things and not other things. So that, in other words, a very obscure avant-garde text written by a Native American poet, published by a very small publishing house, say in Oakland, California, that nobody's ever heard of, could have a certain quote-unquote literary value, can have as much or more literary value, say, than a book published, say, by a famous New York publisher, a book that's won a Pulitzer Prize by an author they're familiar with. So I found actually that the experience of resistance and irritation and unhappiness on the part of students when given material that's very unfamiliar and alienating to them can produce actually wonderful pedagogical payoffs, and can lead them to epiphanies actually about as I said, their assumptions about literature and the ways in which they read. And it can get them to rethink and redo their habits of reading. And often they're happier. I mean, they're happy for the experience of it. It doesn't mean that they won't then go and read and prefer reading a Jane Austen novel to some of the books that I teach. But in the end, they'll have thought a lot about literature and learn something, I hope, from the class.